Now, one thing I realized very early on in researching for this talk is that to introduce him was going to be hard, because even to give a brief nod to all the things he's done would pretty much take up our whole hour. So, yes, right. So in summary, I'm going to sum up, and I'm going to ask for your pardon for the inevitable omissions in this list. First, I'd like to note that Professor Sadoway is renowned for making Intro to Solid State Chemistry the most popular class at MIT, which is really quite a feat and one that was recognized by many, including Bill Gates, who made a point of finding and watching each of his lectures. He's an accomplished entrepreneur who has founded several companies, including Ambri and Avanti, which are commercializing batteries, Ambri specifically a liquid metal battery, to enable us to store clean energy for use in the electric grid. And also Boston Metal, which has the very modest goal of creating steel without a carbon footprint. Oh, and lastly, you may have noticed him in the news and on TV once or twice. He recently received the 2022 European Inventor Award, and he stood up to a solid grilling from Stephen Colbert regarding how new battery technologies can lead to world peace. More on that in a little bit. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Don Sadoway, and welcome to the Science Cafe.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and I don't think you skipped over anything. So it's a pleasure to be here. Please,
Thank you.
you're in charge here.
All right, thanks. So there's a lot to cover this evening, but I'd like to start with where this journey began for you. Growing up, did you always plan to become a chemist and or a professor or a scientist? And when did you know chemistry was your calling?
I think I was born in Toronto, and I grew up in a town about 35 miles east of Toronto. It was essentially the GM of Detroit of Canada. A lot of GM plants out of town, mainly the working class. And I went to high school there, and I was really taken by the chemistry teacher. And I thought that I would become a teacher. So I knew I'd get a bachelor's degree at the University of Toronto and then come back and teach chemistry. When I got to the university, I saw the chemistry professor. I said, I like that. I think I'd like that more than being a high school teacher, but I'm going to need a PhD. And so I stayed on to get the PhD in order to be a teacher at the university level. Had no interest in research. I'll be honest with you. I was not drawn to the research. I had to perform research in order to earn the PhD. So therefore, it was the teaching that drew me to the research, not the research that enhanced the teaching. And then eventually with that PhD, and I postdoc here at MIT. And then, of course, if you're a junior faculty member, you better do research or you're going to be fired in short order. And so the fear of failure propelled me to do research. And eventually somewhere along the way, I started to turn to things that would intersect technology and society. And that's how I ended up with these topics.
Nice. What are your favorite parts of being a professor?
Well, I think it was the teaching. The teaching drew me to it. And when I was teaching 3091, I had 500 plus students at the peak. We had a couple of years, we had 630 students. And the joy of getting in a classroom in front of that number of people. And most of them don't want to take chemistry. It's a required class. So I knew that 95% of the people sitting there would rather be anywhere else. And it was my challenge to hook them and make them interested. And by the end of the semester, say, I always hated chemistry, and this is my favorite class. And I couldn't do that with stand-up comedy. It had to be good, because you know the MIT students, if they take my class and they discover that in their majors that they are at a disadvantage because I was just playing games with them, that would be the end of that class. So it had to be done correctly. There's a transparency there that makes people work hard, and everybody wins. The students get a better class, and I have to do a better job of teaching. And it was through that teaching that I would say that the paradigm flipped for me. As I said earlier, you know, at MIT, everybody has to teach, do research, and there's some governance committee work and things like that. And the idea is that everybody who does research should also teach, because through their research, you're going to roll back the frontiers of knowledge, and that's going to trickle down into the class. And that's a nice model. But I flipped that model. It was because I was teaching this large first year chemistry class, the rudiments of chemistry, just electronic structure, bonding, and so on. That gave me, by having to repeat and refine, that gave me the clarity of thought that allowed me to invent these batteries. I didn't invent the batteries because I took advanced chemistry. I didn't use density functional theory or any of that stuff. I simply sat with the periodic table in front of me. I knew this is a good electron donor, this is an electron acceptor. This is what I need to invent a battery. So, sometimes, most of my colleagues would kill to avoid that teaching assignment because it's viewed as drudgery to be teaching this large, what they call a service class. Everybody wants to teach the most advanced class in their specialty area. And I did teach an electrochemistry class to graduate students, fine. But that wasn't enough for me. Why should I be teaching 25 people when I can be teaching 525 people? I'm looking for maximum impact.
Right, that's true. Well, and that's something I noticed in your research is that you always seem to buck the trend, right? Instead of going to the most experts, you like to teach the novices, and you looked at things always from a novel perspective. Do you create that in your kids? Do you look for students to work with you who already have that instinct?
If I can see it, sure. But the main thing is, when you're a place like MIT, you're surrounded by really brilliant students, and if you can harness that brilliance with the idealism of young people, then you look for those that self-select. I never advertised. I never said I'm looking for people. I would never do that. Somebody would come and knock on my door. They'd done some research. They'd stumbled upon me, and they wanted to, and they would say, "I'm sorry, I really don't have any experience in electrochemistry." That's fine, because if you come to me and you've been steeped in lithium-ion battery research, you're probably useless. Your brain is so been formed to think, look at the entire world through lithium-ion chemistry. You're not going to invent anything. Look at what new battery chemistry have you seen come from lithium-ion in the last 30 years? Improvements in manufacturing, which have led to dramatic decrease in capital costs. In 2005, listen to this number, 2005, the capital cost of lithium-ion batteries was $2,000 per kilowatt hour. I'm not making this up, $2,000 per kilowatt hour. Today, it's, you can argue, you can read the nonsense that Bloomberg puts out that most of it's wrong, but the real number is below $200. So it's from 2,000 to below 200. Some people are saying it's even down around 100. If you believe that, okay. But it's all been on manufacturing. It hasn't been on changing the chemistry. And if you want to change a battery, it's a new chemistry. It's very different from what's happened in microelectronics. Microelectronics has gone from a transistor the size of my thumb to down to something of the size of my thumbnail that it has. I don't know, somebody here can tell me how many million devices are in that same piece of real estate, but it's all silicon. It's getting better and better and better at making more and more devices per unit area, and that's fantastic. But if I said, no, you can't use silicon, you have to change the chemistry completely. I said, whoa, wait a minute. And that's what you have to do with the battery. It's really, really hard. And you're not competing against batteries. It's not battery versus battery. It's battery versus hydrocarbon. And they're heavily subsidized, deeply entrenched. So, but I like the tough problem.
Clearly. Well, and to your point, there's a lot of momentum in the current solutions, right? You really have to step away from them because there's a lot of momentum in fossil fuels and lithium-ion batteries. And to you, what you were saying before, it was your students who came to you and suggested that you take your technology and commercialize it. I believe you said when you founded Ambry.
That's right. So, I'm from Canada. I'm a really good boy. Really. I want to be dutiful, good professor, teach the classes, conduct the research, write the papers, serve on the committees, all that stuff. And when we invented the liquid metal battery, by around 2010, 1 year into the research that was sponsored by the RPE, was newly formed RPE. I was a first round RPE winner. And within about a year, we had what we considered first reduction to practice of the technology. And so two of my students came to me, both had been PhDs with me, and they were now postdocs. And they said it's time to start a company. And I wasn't crazy about it because I thought companies it's corrupting. It's a diversion. That money is corrupting, and I can see it in many of my colleagues. I won't name names, although I could. It's disgusting what goes on. MIT likes to crow about, oh, we have this fantastic entrepreneurial environment and so on. Yeah, it is, but I've seen the dark side of that, and it's really bad. It's bad for the students, it's bad for the university. The university doesn't care. They love it because they can look at all these companies that can spun out. Got to look at the corrosive influence on the learning environment. So I said I didn't want that, and they said, "You keep talking about science and service to society. Well, you think that publishing a paper in Nature is going to change the world? No, that's a first step. But if you want to get the technology out there, you have to go with it. If the inventor doesn't go with the technology, the company will fail, almost certain." I said, "Okay, you've got me with that." And that's how they persuaded me to go forward. And then, as you said, Bill Gates has been watching my chemistry lectures online. Why, I don't know, but he was. And then he became our first investor. Not because I wrote a dynamite op-ed piece for the Wall Street Journal, but because I was teaching 3091, and those lectures were too big to fit into the rooms. So they were being recorded. And then by around 2003, they were being, well, they used to be broadcast on MIT closed circuit TV. They'd be broadcast 6 times a night, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. Guess which program was watched most heavily? 1 a.m. Because all the kids, they're on Hawaiian Standard Time. They don't operate in Eastern Time Zone. But then by 2003, they could post the lectures online. And then by about 2005, it was like streaming video. You could just click on it. And Bill started watching those. And so then he became our first investor. So that's how I got kind of dragged into this whole business. It's not the entrepreneur thing. It's about delivering the technology, getting it out there. Because I found myself really getting hooked on the whole idea of harnessing science for climate change mitigation. And to finish the job, you've got to get the technology out there where it can be deployed. It won't be deployed by simply writing a paper and filing a patent application.
Right. Well, and can you actually explain sort of the primer on your liquid metal batteries to the group?
Sure. So as you know, the battery has 2 electrodes and has an electrolyte in between. So they're typically solids, right? Your lead acid battery has got a lead electrode and a lead dioxide electrode, and as the name implies, got sulfuric acid. And the lithium ion battery has a solid negative. It's typically carbon. And the positive electrode is typically a metal oxide, cobalt oxide, nickel oxide, manganese oxide, and the electrolyte is a liquid. In this case, it's an organic liquid because lithium is so reactive. Well, I said, well, I want something big and cheap, and I got my inspiration because the research that I did initially when I came to MIT was in electrometallurgy, aluminum, magnesium, titanium. And this is all high temperature liquid metals and molten salts. And a colleague of mine once said to me, we haven't got the faintest idea how to deal with the grid level storage. And there were actually people around 2005 thought, oh, we got this one. We're going to use lithium ion. I said, you're out of your mind. It's $2,000 a kilowatt hour and it's fire prone. And they said, yeah, but the price is going to come down. Yeah, but what about the fire? Oh, pretend it doesn't exist. So this colleague of mine said, you've done all this work in electrometallurgy, liquid metals and molten salts. You think any of that might apply in batteries? And they left my office. And I started thinking about it, and eventually I said, well, wait a minute. Why don't we make the electrodes liquids? So we have liquid metal, 2 liquid metals. But you think, well, yeah, but you can't have liquid metals lying side by side, because now the current is gonna have to go up and over, it's gonna be stupid. And I said, well, what if I had, liquid metal, high density liquid metal, and a low density liquid metal, and a molten salt in between? So we started with something like magnesium. Magnesium has a density less than 2. And antimony's got a density of greater than 6. And a molten salt's got a density about 3 and 4. So the metal's insoluble in the salt, and the salt's insoluble in the metal. So these 3 liquids lie on top of one another the way salad oil and vinegar lie on top of one another. Instead of 2 liquids, we've got 3. And so the top layer is the negative electrode, the bottom layer is the positive electrode. Everything is liquid. And when the battery discharges, the magnesium wants to alloy with the antimony. It ionizes, and the magnesium layer gets thinner. And over time, the antimony layer gets thicker and thicker. And now it's a magnesium antimony alloy. And then to charge the battery, you force current through it, and you replace the magnesium at the top. You're essentially running an electrorefinery. So you purify the magnesium, you purify the salt, you purify the antimony, and return the battery to its pristine initial condition. And we do that thousands of times. You've got batteries. This is not just at the lab at MIT. I'm talking over at Ambry. Cells have been running for, say, 5 years, 5,000 cycles, deep discharge every day. 5,000 cycles. If you did one a day, that would be 13 years. And this is still retaining over 99+% of nameplate capacity. If you do that to lithium ion, it'll sink like a stone. So, this is the what came out of this idea of really trying something radically different. And when I first proposed it, everybody was, whoa. They say, yes, we want radical innovation. I said, how about this? Well, we wanted something radical. We didn't think it was going to be that radical. I said, okay, so you want something radical, but there's going to be risk, right? I said, you want radical innovation at 0 risk? Those are orthogonal. You want 0 risk? I'll give you 0 risk. That's what people have been giving us for 30 years. Incremental improvements to lithium-ion batteries. 100% of your work is successful. What impact? I don't see it. You want to change? You got to take big risks. Do things that are audacious that people say, well, that's crazy, because most people will self-edit themselves. They'll think of something like this. Yeah, that's stupid. It's crazy enough. It just might be the right answer. If it's, there was this one argument between Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. I don't know what they were fighting over. Einstein was general relativity, and Bohr was like at the beginning of quantum. And one of them says to the other, after repeatedly getting nowhere in the discussion, he says, "You're not thinking. You're just behaving linearly. You're just behaving logically." And that's what I see. People, if this, then this, if this, then this, if this, then this. And the infinity of incremental improvements doesn't give you a breakthrough. You just chase the asymptote and nothing happens.
Right. Well, on that note, what are all the various areas where this beats the current technology? What, like, cost per kilowatt hour? Say you believe the sales pitch that lithium ions made it down to $100. What do you think that,
Well, liquid metal will beat lithium ion on several important counts. First of all, the capital cost will be lower because we don't use cobalt oxide, nickel oxide, manganese oxide. We don't use lithium. These are all constrained resources. This was a train wreck that was coming. You look at stuff that I was writing back in 2012. I was already talking about, when I gave my TED talk, I said, if you want to make something dirt cheap, make it out of dirt. And preferably dirt that's locally sourced. That way you have a secure supply chain. Well, that just went over everybody's head in 2012. Yeah. Today, everybody's saying, yeah, if we want, right now with the constraints on the ingredients for lithium ion batteries, so you have our federal government and a whole bunch of people here who are lobbyists to the federal government saying, we have to onshore. We're going to find cobalt in the United States. Well, that's one approach. I think it's stupid, but we'll probably go for it. What I say is invent your way out of it, so we don't need cobalt. We have batteries that can be sourced 100% in North America. No China, no Congo, everything done here. So you invent your way out. And so this is the approach that we've been taking.
Right, and that, in that sense, this company really follows your goal for creating a more peaceful and prosperous world. Right? You're
Yeah.
beginning to,
Yeah, okay, so that was a remark. When I was briefed by the producer, when I was gonna go on the Colbert report, there was this, she said, we went over a whole bunch of things that they'd already prepped Colbert on. And she said, is there anything else you want to say? And I was just sort of I was being a little bit flippant. I said, yeah, electrochemistry is the key to world peace. And I said, what? Yeah. I said, what do you mean by that? Well, if we make hydrocarbons irrelevant, if we plunge the price of petroleum down below $20 a barrel, we'll topple dictators, Russia, Venezuela, Iran, Saudi Arabia. We'll topple them all without firing one bullet. Yeah. And it's true. That's why you don't see a lot of support for radical innovation in electrification, because we just got to keep burning those fossil fuels. So yeah, that was that. But the other point where the liquid metal battery beats lithium ion, and it is, to me, it is reckless on the part of people putting in these 100 megawatt hour installations of lithium ion batteries. This is a ticking time bomb. There's only two kinds of lithium ion batteries: those that have caught fire, and those that will catch fire. And but small, it's something like this. That's what it was invented for. It was invented for handheld devices, and it's done a fantastic job. It's given us so much that we value in the modern world. But it was never intended to go for a 100 megawatt hour storage facility, and it wasn't even intended to go to cars. You think some of the cars today have 100 kilowatt hour packs on them? That's an awful lot of energy, and the thing is fire prone. So liquid metal battery can't catch fire. I once had a couple of guys from DARPA come to see me. It was probably around 2008, very early days. I had no data yet. And they said, so you're talking about this battery. Could we put that on a forward operating base in Afghanistan? I said, sure. They said, well, what happens if a sniper's bullet goes into this battery casing? Well, I said, if it goes in the top, it'll alloy with the magnesium. If it goes in the bottom, it'll alloy with the antimony, and if it goes in the middle, it'll just get lost in the molten salts. Yeah, but stuff's going to start leaking. I said, yeah, well, as it leaks, it'll freeze. And the guy looks at his buddy and says, battle hardened. That's like they never use fuel cells in combat. There's a fuel cell. The guy says, I got a tank of hydrogen and so on. So I heard this story. They've got this fuel cell power in a backpack, and they have it in a conference room. And they tell these guys, I think they're Navy SEALs or something like that. They say, go in there and inspect this thing. Guy opens the door. He says, what's that noise? What's a fan? He says, forget it. It's got a fan. He says, somebody had spectral analyzer. Just pick up the hum of that fan. It'll just pick us off like nothing. So, all these practicalities that come into play, and that's the folly of a lot of the misguided so-called innovation, where they latch on to some property that's superior, and it's good, but it has to be all of them. That's why lithium ion, 100 megawatt hour. You can't say, yeah, but it's tried, it's tested, we've got all the manufacturing, all this stuff. Yeah, but it's fire prone. You don't have an answer for that. And by the way, they require them to put in these things, fire suppression, sprays and all that stuff. You can't put out the fire because you have fuel and oxygen inside the can. It doesn't stop. You can't stop it. If you smother it with carbon dioxide, smother it with blanketing, whatever, it just keeps on burning. That 787 that caught fire on January 7th, 2013 here on Logan Airport. They said, well, we opened up the side, we saw this thing about a meter in diameter, glowing white hot, and it took us an hour and 40 minutes to put out the fire. They didn't put out the fire. It burned itself out. only when it burned itself out. It ran out of either fuel or it ran out of supply of oxygen because the cobalt oxide dissociates and gives off oxygen, which makes the thing burn hotter, which makes the dissociation go faster. So now what are you gonna do with that? Pour some water in it? You missed a day of class.
Right, so safety is one of the big benefits,
Yeah,
the big one. Also cycle life. So
Well,
you guys are
cycle-
running at 20 years at 90+%.
yeah,
Still?
Right.
Right, so one of the downsides is this has to continually be used, so your batteries need to stay, what, at 500 degrees Celsius?
right.
And that, I'm assuming, happens once it gets to site, because it is shipped as a solid.
That's correct,
Okay, so you heat it up on site,
right.
you're looking at a major installation of grid energy storage. You apply external heat to liquefy it,
Right.
and then what cycle does it have to maintain in order for it to self-generate enough heat to stay in that state?
A daily cycle. I mean, these things are designed to be used. They're designed to bridge the intermittency. Let's say you have solar panels. So you'll generate and use electricity through the day when the sun is shining, and you'll peel off some of that electricity and store it so that at this hour, you'll be able to draw electricity from the battery. And that, when you're sending electricity through the battery, because you're charging it, you're generating joule heat and you trap that heat. And then when you're discharging the battery, you're generating joule heat. So that charge, rest, discharge, rest on a daily basis allows you, with appropriate insulation and so on, to run continuously. And by the way, when it freezes, it doesn't freeze. You ever seen an ice cube train? Well, maybe everybody has a refrigerator that just magically makes these things, but if you put the water in the ice cube tray and you open it, say after about 30 minutes, you'll start to see what? They're all frozen? Or one or two of them is frozen and the other is going to freeze? No, they freeze from the outside in. They freeze from the periphery. So that's what happens to these batteries. We have something the size of a 40-foot shipping container. And the batteries on the periphery will start to freeze. The ones in the center are still warm. Once you start passing current, they'll melt. The front will melt back and so on. You'd have to stop using it for about a week for the whole thing to be totally frozen. But even then you can get it going. But these are designed to be used. They're not designed to be sitting there like a backup power supply, say in some remote location for say a cell phone tower or something like that. That's not what this thing is for. For that, use lead acid battery. You don't need this.
Right. So where does Ambry stand in their research now? I saw your announcement from September of a data center in Washington for Microsoft.
It's for Microsoft. I don't know whether it's in Washington State or where it is, but definitely Microsoft has chosen the Ambry liquid metal battery to go with their facility.
What size?
It's like, forgive me, I didn't come prepared for that question, but it's got to be in the vicinity of 100 megawatt hours.
All right, and that should be up and running. How far out are we looking for?
Next year. Right now, they're moving from Marlborough, just across 90 on the other side of 90 near Hopkinton, to expand for the manufacturing facility. There's one of these chicken and egg situations. Before you want to spend several $100 million to build a manufacturing facility, you want to make sure that you really have the correct format of the battery. We started, our initial cells were the wrong size.
Shot glasses.
Oh, I started, well, you've seen the TED Talk, I have a shot glass that have a hockey puck. Everybody knows a hockey puck is 3 inches in diameter, right? No, and then we had the 6-inch diameter, I called the saucer, but the first battery we built, it was, I called it the pizza, it was 16 inches in diameter. 16 inches diameter, 1,000, it was 1 kilowatt hour in a single cell. But the thing weighed about 350 pounds, and eventually we came to realize this is not practical for manufacturing. And so we changed. And then we changed the composition.
Right.
Because the price, we started lithium ion was $1,000 a kilowatt hour in 2010. And we were gunning for about 270. And then by about 2014, lithium ion was down below 300. And our investors said, you guys are toast. And so we jumped to a different chemistry. And then lithium ion fell even further. Never mind it. We kept saying, you realize lithium ion is stupid at this scale. It doesn't matter. You know, to your point, Kim, you know, you have this thing, there's a term, it's called premature lockdown. That's what happens when people adopt, you know, remember the early days of video cassette recorders? There was the Sony Betamax, and then there was the VHS, and Betamax was far superior, but somehow VHS got in there because Sony miscalculated. It was a cultural miscalculation. They made their tapes 1 hour long because they figured Americans are going to tape 2 30-minute sitcoms or something. Okay? And somebody with VHS made it so it could go 2 hours, which means 2 hours is greater than 90 minutes, which means you could put an entire movie on there. And that tilted, didn't matter the superiority of the technology. So that's premature lockdown. And we see it with lithium ion.
And so was that the drive to go from magnesium to calcium?
Yeah, yeah.
Was,
So that
was cost driven?
cost driven, calcium, and the salt is calcium chloride, which is what we throw on the roads here in the winter time. Yeah, talk about dirt cheap, yeah, we throw it on the road.
Nice, so you've had the basic technology for Ambry starting around 2010 and kind of changed, but obviously there was a lot of technological complications to get it to
Right.
commercialization, which has been this interim. What were some of the biggest battles you guys had to face to turn this concept into commercializable reality?
Well, the whole thing was just, you know, I'm an electrochemist and I love to theorize and then reduce to practice the electrochemistry. But the journey to manufacture that gets into mechanical engineering, and you know, these are big steel containers, welding, and then we have a feed through because the metal on the top has to have a connector. The metal on the bottom is connected to the cell body, so that's fine. But you can't have both of them connected to the cell body. They'll short. So I have this metal foam at the top. And that feed through has to be hermetically sealed. And it's sitting at 500 degrees. So it's going to have to be a ceramic that's hermetically sealed and can expand and contract with the same coefficient of thermal expansion as steel. Otherwise, it'll crack on heating or crack on cooling. And I could have built that in 2011 to a NASA price point. So to build that cheaply, and to do it reliably, it's not like grad school. You make 10 cells, 8 of them fail, 1 of them works. You get some data, high fives all around the laboratory. That doesn't work. We got to build these things to 6 sigma, and to do all that. And there's nobody out there who could help us. And all of the fantastic work that's gone into driving the cost of manufacturing lithium-ion batteries down so much was pretty much useless for us because the lithium ion battery is so different. So most of what they use, in fact, when A123 went bankrupt, people said, wow, you guys are lucky. There's going to be all this equipment on fire sale. I said, we can't use any of that. It's useless. So we had to invent not the chemistry, but the entire universe.
Right, the whole thing. And then okay, so this leads maybe into Avanti.
Yeah.
So another company, different chemistry,
Mhm.
meant for a different scale, basically, right? So where we're thinking Ambry is grid level storage, Avanti is home level storage.
Right.
And what is there's different chemistry, but what is the difference fundamentally in the chemistry that yields such different scope?
So we already talked about liquid metal battery, how you have to use it every day to generate enough heat and so on. Well, when we were at MIT, all of our cells, and we call it the shot glass correctly, they were tiny and they wouldn't generate enough heat, even with the proper insulation. They wouldn't generate enough heat to remain molten just by the normal charge and discharge. So we have external heaters and so on. Then when we built the Ambry batteries at scale, they generate enough heat. The first one we had was, I don't know, something like 15 kilowatt hours in a quarter of a shipping container with insulation. And we're so happy it cycle. Didn't with the initial heat input to melt things, and after that it cycled. And then people said, well, how small can you make it? I thought, why ask me small for? They wanted single family home. Now, a single family home in Massachusetts probably uses about 10 kilowatt hours of electricity per day. So let's say you put solar panels on your roof and you have a bunch of days like today. So you want to have some backup storage. So maybe you want to have 50, maybe you want to be really super conservative, maybe have 100 kilowatt hours, which is about what's in your car. But anyways, it's not my car. I don't have an electric car. But so if you try to downsize an Ambry liquid metal battery to 100 kilowatt hours, it probably won't generate enough heat to be to cycle and not require heat input. So I said, there's plenty of room here for small scale stationary storage, and that's why I conceived of the Avanti battery.
And a lot of the peripheral research you had to do for Ambry, does that scale because still liquid metal batteries? And I forget the technology. What are the two chemicals, the two components of the Avanti?
So Avanti is aluminum. Because I said, let's go full bore, because I coined this term cost informed discovery. So I sit with a periodic table. I tell my students, you can't go into any of this swath because it won't scale. You're forbidden to touch this part of the periodic table. So I said, what is the cheapest metal I could use in a battery? And I said, it's aluminum. That's the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust. It's even more abundant than iron, even though steel is cheaper than aluminum, but that's because of the relative stability of the oxide. So I said, all right, I'm going to make aluminum metal. None of this carbon host like lithium ion. I don't want any of that stuff. Aluminum metal is one electrode. And so what am I going to use for the non-metal? And of course, all the people that have been poisoned, their brains have been turned to mush because they're working on lithium ion. They start looking for intercalation compounds and stuff like that. No. I said, I want something really simple. I want something that's reaction. And I said, give me the cheapest non-metal, sulfur. So I put sulfur opposite aluminum. Those are my bookends. And now I need an electrolyte. And if it's aluminum, it can't be aqueous. And I'm not going to use the volatile flammable electrolyte that they use in the flame liner. So what I'm going to do instead is something else. And I work with a lot of molten salts in my metal production. And I found a set of molten salts that are liquid down around the boiling point of water. So it's elevated temperature, but 65 degrees Celsius. It's hardly elevated, but anyways. So that's how the thing was constructed.
Nice. And how far out before Avanti has some shippable trial products?
Oh yes, always a tough question. Niels Bohr said predictions difficult, especially when it's about the future. And I'm hoping that we've learned a lot from the Ambry experience. All that scar tissue will benefit us.
Right.
Maybe there's some paths that we can find the shortcuts along. But it's a matter of upscaling. The Ambry journey's been over 10 years. This one, maybe we can cut that in half and get down to 5.
Nice.
Somebody gets really excited about it. There are times when more money will buy more people, which will make you move more quickly. Everything now is upscaling. It's not like, just between this and 3 more Nobel Prize winning discoveries, we've really got something here. No. This is upscaling. This thing works. We published a paper in Nature in August, and there are data in there that you don't get into Nature just by writing a letter to mother. This is really tough stuff. The level of intense scrutiny is unparalleled, and we've got all the data in there about cycle testing and very, very rapid charging. And so that people say, well, could it go into a car? Possibly, but that's not our opening volume. Because quite frankly, for 2 summers when I was still back in Oshawa, I worked at General Motors in purchasing, and I saw how vicious the automobile industry is to its suppliers. And these people who are so excited that they're going to be supplying batteries to Hyundai or to GM or to whoever, they're kidding themselves. they're gonna get, the car companies will say, oh, we're gonna take a small order from you, and of course you lowball that price because you wanna get your foot in the door. And then they come back and say, we really like your product, we're gonna up the order by 10x next year. Fantastic, but you know, we're really gonna have to see that price come down. And that's the way it goes. And I'm saying, okay, lots of volume, zero profit margin. You want to be in that business? Not me. So people ask me, well, what about cars? I say, with Louis Ortiz, one of my students who's done my CEO, he in the early days, if I said the word car, he would say, stop it. I don't want you saying anything about automotive. It's stupid. It's completely stupid. I know that there's a big push to get all electric vehicles, but not for a startup. Not for a startup. It's insane. You're just putting yourself out. You don't have the resilience for that.
Right, no, that comes later, right? They can come to you after the fact.
Yeah.
So currently, the US has about 6.5 gigawatts, it sounds like, of energy storage in the grid, and we need to do much better.
Yeah.
When are we gonna get there? And what myriad combination of technologies? I mean, you guys are part of the picture. Hydro storage, forced hydro, like what are the other things you see as significant contributors to cracking that nut?
Well, there's a plurality of battery chemistries that might work. I mean, look, there's two reasons that things fail. Either they don't work, or they do work, but they work at an unacceptably high cost. And so it has to work, it has to be cost effective. So there are other things that can be used. There's aqueous flow batteries. There are other people who have been working on different chemistries. There was a zinc chemistry. Every so often people go back to grandmother's attic and drag out some technologies from 40 years ago and think they're going to take another run at them. So there are other electrochemical approaches. A lot of people are trying compressed air. And I know there's some mechanical engineers in the audience. And you know, you can do this, but it takes energy to compress and there's a loss of efficiency, and then you decompress and you drive a turbine, there's a loss of air. And the same with pumped hydro. Pumped hydro is the #1 stationary storage, but it requires difference in elevation and a huge reservoir to store all that water. And I think the pumped hydro that could be exists now. And if you tried to get permitted to install new pumped hydro, I think it'd be very, very difficult because people don't have the stomach to have people messing with nature. They say, you're not going to put a big dam here and have a giant lake and so on and so forth. But there is actually a pumped hydro here in Western Massachusetts. And, you know, when the excess power in the day, they use like energy to pump water uphill, they store it, and then when they need extra, they let it run downhill. It's sort of like hydroelectric power on demand, and it works. You know, there are even people that this one really saddens me. I don't care if people want to spend their private money on it, but when I see government funds going into this, it really saddens me. It's hydrogen. People say we're going to electrolyze water, we're going to use hydrogen, we're going to trap hydrogen, then we're going to use hydrogen to generate electricity. Yes, you can do it, but the cost effectiveness there it's just not there, because you can't burn hydrogen. If you choose to do combustion with hydrogen, you have to run like a welding torch. You have to run hydrogen with pure oxygen. If you burn hydrogen with air, as you know is 80% nitrogen, you will make no CO2. Congratulations, but you will make NOx. It's a precursor to smog and it's a greenhouse gas. Nobody wants to talk about this. So, you know, so the only way to convert the hydrogen back to electricity is through the fuel cell. What's the fuel cell have? What's it made of? Well, there's some ceramics. What are the electrodes made of? Platinum group metals. Guess who? Guess who is one of the biggest proponents of hydrogen? The platinum group metals miners. Why? Every time they see an electric car, they cry because an electric car doesn't require a catalytic converter. The #1 industrial use of platinum group metals is CAT converters. So all of a sudden they go into the phone booth, they come out, they open up their their shirt, and they are now green man. I'm green. And I'm advocating for hydrogen everywhere. Hydrogen electrolyzers, hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen, because you will buy my metals. That's it. I've run into people, I've been at mining conferences. And there's a bunch of guys from vanadium producers. Bushveld in South Africa, the people here in the United States. All the vanadium guys, green, vanadium flow batteries. I said, do you know anything about the electrochemistry? They don't know anything. All they know is it has vanadium in it, and we mine vanadium. That's it. This is what's driving our policy. It's really scary. It's just, the nickel story, that's a funny one. You know, back it's 1988. What's happening? Laptop computers have come on the scene. The very first mobile phones, they're not smartphones, they're little flip phones or the candy bars, and they all have nickel metal hydride batteries. And nickel's taking off. And meanwhile, China's coming out of communist slumber. The demand for steel is rising. And so the nickel goes into stainless steel. Now there's new demand for the batteries, and it's outstripping the supply. So what happens? At least one, if not two, of the major mining companies opens new nickel mine. They're about $3 to $4 billion to open that mine. And they're making money. The price of nickel went from $8 a pound to $16 a pound. Everybody's so happy. 1991, what happens? Out on the stage bursts lithium ion. Everybody switches to lithium ion. And the price of nickel collapses. So everybody's, when I go to a conference, the first thing they ask me, we okay? Is lithium going to be out of business? I usually say, if I have anything to do with it, but you're probably okay for the foreseeable future. You know? So, you know, just as I told you earlier, with the supply chain constraints, what's the response? Fund radical innovation. No, the first response is let's onshore this. So now we're scouring North America looking for lithium. There's rock lithium, spodumene in the Carolinas. There's a whole bunch of brines and stuff like that. There's a lot of brines that contain lithium out of the old oil wells. It's really poor, but it's there. You know, nickel. Oh, try to get permitted to open a new nickel mine in North America. Cobalt. There's a town in northern Ontario called Cobalt, Ontario. I wonder why. But you know, try to get permitted to expand that. You know, petroleum, for all of its negative qualities, you know, you drill a hole, put a derrick above it. But you ever seen what a steel iron ore mine looks like? What a copper mine looks like? I mean, by the way, copper, you want to see something that's going to be in short supply? The entire green transition is fueled by copper. We're going to have to lay all kinds of new cables, conduits, wiring, transmission lines, all this stuff. It's copper. There is no substitute for copper. And we're up against the limits of what we have coming out of mines. And people say, well, we have to open up mines. And I said, I think I wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal. I said, mine is just the first part. You don't have the smelting capacity. If I gave you copper ore for free, you can't turn that into copper metal unless you have a smelter. And guess what? You go to a place like MIT, all the other schools, the engineering schools, they imitate MIT. So, you know, I was schooled as a chemical metallurgist. They say metallurgist. Maybe if you're, you know, like advanced alloys, oh, that's cool. But chemical metallurgy, yeah, I turned dirt into metal. Oh man. Yeah, but guess what? That's the thing that's going to stall the green transition. To say nothing, people think we're going to just recycle our way into sustainability. No, we're not. Well, you know. So there.
A lot of progress, long way to go. I don't want to run through our time without giving the audience here and online a chance to ask questions.
Sure. Okay, the question is, did I work on sodium? And the answer is, Yes, but we abandoned it. And the reason is that, remember when I said that the liquid metal is insoluble in the salt is insoluble liquid metal? Sodium is an exception. Sodium is actually has an unacceptably high solubility in the molten salt. And when it dissolves in molten salt, it renders the salt a little bit electronically conductive, which means when you charge the battery, it's starting to self-discharge right away. But one of the first batteries we built was sodium bismuth. It worked beautifully, except it wouldn't hold its charge. But anyway, so I know there's a lot of excitement about sodium ion as a replacement for lithium ion, and there may be some possibility there. But certainly in the liquid metal battery, it didn't work for scientific reasons.
You said not to mention cars, so today's Boston Globe had an article about trucks and a capacitor that can charge in 90 seconds and run for 30 minutes. What's wrong with capacitors?
So capacitors are very good in the way that they charge and discharge very quickly, and they don't show any capacity fade because it's a surface effect. The problem is because it's a surface effect, the total amount of charge that you can store per unit volume is rather small. So, I mean, I can see capacitors being used in tandem on electric vehicles so that if you need a power burst, then you use the capacitor. And also if you want to do something along the lines of regenerative braking. So when you're putting on the brakes, you're trying to capture that energy. A lot of batteries, lithium ion in particular, does not take well to rapid charging, pulsing. So the way to extend the life of lithium ion is to first take that energy, put it in the capacitor, and then bleed it into the lithium ion battery. So the capacitor is fantastic utility, but unfortunately, it doesn't give you range. The capacitor gives you power, but it doesn't give you energy. Total energy is too small. Unless you figure out a way to make everything all surface and no volume.
Still in the back.
So my question is with regard to selecting liquid metal. So the two liquid metals separated by molten salt as an electrolyte, right?
Yeah.
So
Correct.
when we are heating it at very high temperature, that's you said around 500 degrees Celsius, there could be a potential entrainment. So is there any limitation when we do the charging and recharging it again?
I'm sorry, I missed the word. You said it could be a potential what? I'm sorry. I didn't get
Entrainment,
entrainment.
because at very high temperature, there could be entrainment from the electrode, or is the interfacial
No.
tensor sufficiently enough?
No, once everything is molten, the three of them are mutually insoluble. Well, no, let's say the two metals are insoluble in the salt. Unless you're really unlucky and you put the two metals together, then they'll melt. And the first order of business will be to generate the second layer, but they will not entrain. They will be expelled by the molten salt. There's two reasons. One is they're insoluble, and the other thing is liquid metals have very high surface tension. Now, some people in this room are old enough that you may remember when you're in high school playing with mercury on the table and stuff like that. So what do you know about mercury? If you spill water on the table, it will sheet across the table. If you spill mercury on the table, it makes these little beads. It beads up, and that is also going to prevent the entrainment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is the efficiency of that battery constrained by the thermal characteristics? It sounds like the bigger the battery, the more efficient it is because of the volume to the surface ratio or something. Is there a lower limit that becomes impractical? And what's the higher limit of being impractical?
So we've not done an exhaustive study on that because we're driven by what the market wants in terms of capacity. If somebody's asking for 100 megawatt hours, we know how to get there in the most economic way. What it turns out that even with running at 500 degrees centigrade, and you're right, we're using some of the energy to keep the battery at temperature, so it's not operating at 100% efficiency. But the round trip efficiency of liquid metal battery right now is about 80+%, which is actually a little bit higher than pumped hydro.
Yeah.
And so we can tinker with trying to improve efficiency, and who's going to argue against improving efficiency? But and people will, just to make another point about how tough it is to innovate in this field. When I roll out a new battery chemistry, I'm not greeted with bouquets of flowers. All of the naysayers come out and say, well, this is nonsense, this is going to work, and all this, lithium ion is way more efficient. Yeah, it's efficient, but that's not the metric. I don't care what the efficiency is. If I give you a battery tonight that had a 40% round trip efficiency at a capital cost of $10 a kilowatt hour, every one of you would have it in your home. The only metric that matters is dollars per kilowatt hour per cycle. And don't get distracted in these shiny objects like, the round trip efficiency, or, I've been at conference, scientific meetings. I kid you not, scientific meetings, and somebody from a national lab was presenting some work on some stationary storage, and they're giving data like watt hours per kilogram. So who cares? Are you planning on moving this thing? It doesn't move. Why do you even give that metric? Well, it's got higher watt hours per kilogram than liquid metal. Are you planning on moving it? These are just stupid metrics. These are distractions. The only thing that counts dollars per kilowatt hour per cycle.
I have a question also from online. How do you recycle liquid metal battery?
No, that's easy. The metal, it can be just used. I mean, once the thing is frozen, you just take it, reuse it. The salt can be purified. How? By charging the battery. The whole thing, the steel can go into an electric arc furnace. There's no landfill from this thing.
Any other questions in the room?
Can I ask a question? Actually two. One is, what's the status of your company, Boston Metal, and what kind of, how cheap the green energy should be to compete with the traditional metal kind of generation or refinery process?
Yeah. So Boston Metal, right now, it's on the path of upscaling. It's got over here in Woburn, they're running a 25,000 ampere cell with inert anodes generating oxygen and making pure iron. And by the way, they use as feedstock, not iron oxide. They use iron ore. And hydrogen can't do that. That's another myth. People using hydrogen to make steel. It's completely stupid. It's 60% premium, most expensive steel on the planet. Now, who wants it? You want a green transition that's going to just double your cost of living? Oh yeah, because it's the right thing to do. No, it's because the inventors have done a poor job. And this is a chance to reinvent all of this technology. So Boston Metal will make you better metal at a lower price point using less energy with oxygen as the byproduct. Make a ton of steel, 2/3 of a ton of industrial oxygen. So it's on that path. Now, obviously, it's predicated on the availability of green electricity and has to be cheap. And so, where does it have to be competitive with blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace, and so on? We're probably looking at below 5 cents per kilowatt hour. We go to a place like Quebec. Quebec has so much hydroelectric power, and you can get long-term agreements at between 1 and 2 cents a kilowatt hour. 1 and 2 cents a kilowatt hour making steel. Be easy.
You mentioned the Avanti couple. How do you deal with sulfur as a conductive electrode?
Good question. So sulfur is an insulator. You paid attention in class. Sulfur is an insulator. So it's the same thing that happens in the lithium ion battery. The nickel oxide, cobalt oxide, those things are lithium ion conductors. But they have to conduct both lithium ions and electrons, and they're crummy at electron conduction. So these are our fine particles, and we mix them with fine particles of carbon. And so we do the same thing. We mix carbon with the sulfur, just enough to give us adequate electron conductivity.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any other questions from online, and I think we're about at the end of our time, although I think we could easily go hours further, because we didn't even touch on as Boston Metals and all the other pieces. So thank you guys so much for attending, and please put.
Just one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Bill Gates and in 1970s want to put every PC in everybody's home. When would you put your liquid metal battery in everybody's home?
Well, I would like to put a liquid metal battery in everybody's home, but as I said, it doesn't scale down. So I think maybe the Avanti battery in everybody's home. So soon.
Nice. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, and thank you so much, Dr. Sadoway. And please note that we have the next Science Cafe is coming up next month. It's going to be November 15th at 7:30 p.m. And it will be an interview with another MIT professor, Dennis White, Director of Plasma Infusion Center. So hope to see you there.